Elinor Gadon, and you are watching TV for your soul.
Hi, Eleanor. I'm so happy you are here. I'm always so excited to see you, and I think that this is a really special treat to have you on the Goddess Show because you are one of the first women to bring the goddess to life for so many of us with your book, The Once and Future Goddess. And I would really love you to just share with us what brought you to writing that book, or what began your path that you created a piece of work like that.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for all those kind words. My path starts back in 1967 when my former husband and my family, we all went to India. He was there teaching at the Institute of Management in Calcutta, now called Calcutta. But anyway, and I didn't know anything about India. I was then an art historian who worked in the Museum of Fine Arts and specialized in medieval art. But before going to India, I had 6 months to prepare. I began to read and study. And while I was there, whenever I had a chance, I went to the library. Calcutta had a wonderful library the British had left to read about Indian culture, and particularly the goddess. Or the goddesses, because India has many goddesses. Although, unlike the male gods, each of whom is separate and has a separate devotional tradition, the goddess, who's in Indian language, in Sanskrit and Hindi, it's called Devi, she has one collective name, although she has many individual names. In fact, in my most recent book, now in progress, called The Village Goddess, which is about the village goddesses in Orissa. There are 51,000 of them. Each one has her own name and her own origin story. But all of them share in the power, the life force that the goddess has. One of the things that was most amazing to me in India, and this was way back in 1967, 68, when we didn't have, the women's movement had scarcely gotten started, and was that everywhere we went, and we traveled all over the subcontinent, there were images of sexual, sensual, powerful, beautiful women on the walls of the temples, in the paintings, in the books, everywhere, in the movies. And this was something that we didn't have anything whatsoever like that in the West then.
Wow, that must have inspired you.
Well, it more than inspired me. They have a word for it in Indian languages, which is called Shakti. Shakti is a cosmic energy, but it's female cosmic energy. So it somehow, even though I didn't know anything about it and I didn't understand it, it empowered me in some way because there was something for my inner spirit to resonate with.
Nice. You know, you asked me about my tuning forks, and when you hit the C and the G note together, you get a perfect fit. And I've been using them in my goddess parties for years, and then I read something that said the perfect fifth is the note that the god Shiva used to call the goddess Shakti in the dance of life. And so once I heard that, I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited. I use these tuning forks to get the whole goddess party moving and the goddess energy moving. So I'm thinking that Shakti, in this sense, it's like that movement, that energy that kind of calls forth your deepest self, or like the goddess within you, or that inspiration. Is that what you mean?
Well, that's very nice way of putting it. It means many things, but basically it really means it's the life force, the energy. And so what every child in India would know, that the god Shiva, who's that powerful god, is a corpse without his Shakti. In other words, if he doesn't have his goddess, his Shakti, he's a corpse.
I like that. We need our goddess. So from there, what happened?
Well, of course I didn't know what to do with all of this because I came back and actually had my mother would have called it a nervous breakdown, but anyway, I had the reverse culture shock because in India it's like the inside of me had woken up as if there was a whole kind of wonderful something out there for me to grab, to explore, but there was no counterpart for it in our culture. So what I did was to begin to study about Indian art. Art was my pathway to knowledge and to but it's very sensual. Anyway, and began to study Indian art, and ultimately I got a PhD in Indian art and culture from the University of Chicago. However, learning about the kinds of things that you learn in order to get a PhD doesn't necessarily empower you. It might get you a job, but there's a whole other path that I eventually took, which I call women's spirituality. And that I started on, actually before I wrote the book, but while I was writing it, I moved to California because it seemed to me that Cambridge was a wonderful place to find knowledge in all those books in the libraries, but it wasn't a place where there was any spirit that what I would call the goddess spirit. So I went to the Bay Area in California, where there were already, by this time we're in the, in the early 80s. By that time, there were already goddess practitioners and movements in California. And so that I thought that and also the natural beauty of the Bay Area was very important to me, because I feel that part of what this spirit that I felt so awakened me was the being in touch with the mountains and the rivers and the sea, all of these things which have a kind of rhythm and beat that my bloodstream just corresponds to. And so it was wonderful then again to be outdoors all the time as one can be in California.
Very nice. Did you have like a teacher or a mentor or anything when it came to the goddess?
No.
When did the Once and Future Goddess birth? When did you
Well,
start with that?
when I started with it, actually, when I was teaching at Harvard in Divinity School, and I taught a course there called The Virgin and the Goddess. It was about the Virgin Mary and the goddess in India. And this was in 1978, 79. And I hadn't known of anything about feminist art, but when I was teaching, this is a graduate course for men and women, I heard that there was some woman in Virginia who had some slides of something called feminist art. So I wrote to her and asked her if she would send them to me, or copies of them, and I bought them from her. And there were 40, and all of them are in my book, because these are the people who were already, although they might not have called the goddess, but were doing empowered females, like Anna Mendieta, Nancy Spiro, Mary Beth Edelson, anyway, they were in their work, and that's so interesting because art is prescient. Often it comes out, well, the artists themselves don't quite even know what it is they're producing. They are able to produce something which is in the spirit of the time.
Right.
So they might not have called these goddesses, but although some of them did, like Judy Chicago certainly did. But they were empowered female, sexual, sensual females. And it was so interesting when I went around interviewing artists, both in New York and in Los Angeles. And there, in the book itself, there are 100 images of contemporary female art. And but many of the women would say to me, oh, well, they really couldn't have this published, or they would pull it out from under their bed or something because it was too revealing of either they were vulva-like images or uterus-like images, or and they were embarrassed by them. But Judy Chicago was never embarrassed. So one of the images in the book is something that she did in 1973. It's called, it's the sacred triangle that represents the woman's genitals. And she calls it cunt, temple, flower. I forget, and there's one more thing she calls it. Anyway, and so I was in the end of the, it was this time it was after the book was out, so it must have been in the late 80s. I was on a television show in Los Angeles, and I had that image put on the screen, and when I said cunt, the producer pulled it off the screen and said, you can't use that word on television. And I think of all the violence, all the ugliness, all the oppressive and destructive imagery that we have on television. And cunt is a perfectly good, respectable word. I couldn't have said it like that 30 years ago, but it's Middle English.
Yeah, will you explain that word, because I don't really have a problem using it either, but so many people get so
Well,
offended.
because we made it into a swear word, a derogative word for the female. And that's what so many of the words that were sacred have been turned into derogative words for the female.
So at one point that was considered a sacred word.
Well, I wouldn't say a sacred word, it was ordinary English.
Okay.
Around the time of Shakespeare.
So as you started working with artists and looking into goddess mythology, did you have certain stories that came up for you, like goddess mythological stories?
Well, the first thing that I did in writing the book was, the book is not about the goddesses of India. I originally was going to have them in it, but then I decided to write the book just for the West, and that would just complicate things. So, but I could never have written the book without my understanding something of the goddess in India. So I started out chronologically with the Paleolithic, the first ice age, the old Stone Age. And there we have the most popular, well-known one is called Venus of Willendorf. Willendorf, as I call her, not Venus, because that's a misnomer. And and I want to explain about that. She's the best known of these Paleolithic figures, probably 25,000 years old. And she's in a museum in Vienna. And Willendorf is the place in Austria where she was found. I object to her being called Venus, because Venus has come to mean the sex goddess. And for instance, when I was teaching at Harvard, when I first was using this material, the head of the Fine Arts Department was teaching a course on the history of Western art. And he began with the Paleolithic time, which is called the Creative Explosion, where we have all those fantastic murals on the walls of the caves. And this was his explanation of the little Venus. She's only small enough to be held in my hand, all right, and not found within the cave. These votive images, of which we have more than 200 from that period, were found outside of the caves in places around the open hearths where people lived. As the Willendorf one, they don't have any feet to stand on. They are meant to be propped into the earth, and they're a devotional image. Professor of Fine Arts and teaching of the history of Western art said, it was cold during the winter, and the men in the caves didn't have, were cold and they were hungry, they didn't have enough to eat. So they could only think of two things, food and sex. So they painted all these animals on the walls for food, and they made these little figurines for thinking of sex. All right, now, what Willendorf and the others like her are about is not sex, but fecundity, regeneration, that the lineage should continue, because these were hard times, and people didn't have lots of children, and that the children should survive. So that's what you were asking the Earth Mother for, the survival of your children, or regeneration. The parts of the woman's body that had to do with reproduction were emphasized: breasts, hips, abdomen, and vulva. So those were the parts of the woman's body that had to do with reproduction, so they were exaggerated in all of these images. Now, of the more than 200 that we found, no two are exactly alike. One very interesting one, which is also pictured in the book, is from, it seems outside a cave at the sort of threshold, above the threshold of the cave. And Joseph Campbell, the mythographer, said that even though this wasn't very big, I think it's 17 inches in size, he said everyone would have known who it was, just like they would know the Virgin Mary outside a cathedral. She is, very interestingly, she has one hand raised like this, in which she's holding a notched bison horn, a notch with 13 notches, perhaps the 13 menstrual cycles, or the 13 cycles of the moon. But interestingly enough, the menstrual cycle and the cycles of the moon coincide, which is one of the great mysteries. How come? I mean, we have this mystery in our bodies, all of us who are, all of the women in the world. And then the other hand points to her, what I call the sacred triangle, which is her vulva. And so that this image then tells us something about ritual, about the kind of rituals they might have done for the worship of this Earth Mother.
Wow, that is so fascinating. So what does that say about, those times? Do you think the men were the ones carving
That's always a loaded question because, it used to be that only men were considered the great sculptors or artists, but of course now we have already had some feminist art, and we know that, and not only that, we've recovered great women artists going back to the Renaissance. So maybe women were doing this as well.
Right.
Or maybe women were priestesses. Who knows what was going on then. Certainly in India, in contemporary India, there are plenty of women priestesses. In fact, and one of the interesting things to me when I sort of collect all the information I've gathered all these years is a situation with the Kalahari Bushmen in South Africa. But there they have they no longer, their culture is no longer intact, but 50 years ago it was. And then their primary ritual was a healing ceremony in which everybody in the band, which was only about 35 people, participated. The men danced and the women sang and clapped and made ribbons. All right. Now, then no woman was, and this was, the men were healers. They would, after they would go into trance in their dance, they would then be able to do hands-on healing. Now, but no women were healers. And then it turned out, as anthropologists continued to work with these people, that there were indeed some women who were healers, but they were all postmenopausal. Mm. So the explanation for this, which is very interesting, the power that the Bushman healers had was called Nung, they had a click language. And it was said by the people, by the Bushmen, that if a woman was menstruating, her powers would conflict with this power. So therefore, only a postmenopausal woman, and hardly anybody lived to be that age, could be a healer.
Huh, interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you this because you and I spoke, I don't know, a few months back, and I think I was telling you about the fact that I do rituals with girls, and you said that all women, girls, women of any age, need to have a menstrual ritual.
Yes.
Or, I don't remember your exact words.
Those are the words. I mean, even if you're 80, you need one.
Yeah.
Because we don't honor menstruation in our culture, and therefore this is a woman coming into her full power, and understood as then being fully sexual. And so that in India, you gotta get your daughter married in a hurry, so or you used to have to. Anyway, because that's what one of the Indian writers who writes about the goddess speaks of the fact that a girl, when she has her first menstruation, it's like you pull back a bow like this with the arrow in it, and that you have all that energy to release. That girl has the energy in her body.
Wow. And she has it throughout her cycle.
Yes, but it's particularly onset of the first menstruation, which is honored in India and many other cultures. The Navajo Indians, for instance, have honor, and many of the other American Indians do. And the fact that we consider this, all the negative names like the curse, or even a neutral name like the period, and something to be embarrassed about or be ashamed of.
Yeah. Yes, we do need to celebrate it more. I mean, I believe that we need more ritual in our lives and honoring of ourselves and our bodies.
I think it's particularly important for the puberty, the girl on her onset of puberty, because like the work of Carol Gilligan and her team, her colleagues, shows that that's a time when many girls, instead of telling the truth and feeling empowered, feel they no longer can tell the truth. They no longer can trust their mother's truth. Because they say their mother hasn't told them about how it really is in the world.
Right. Yeah, I think it's very important too. I really, that age group for me is a a pinpoint of where I want to do the most of my work moving forward.
I want to. I've asked different people to do it, but no one has ever done it. I think we need my book for the girl on the onset of puberty, so that we just take the pictures, but use language in it that's appropriate for a 10 to 13-year-old.
You know, we were talking about you know, how you discover the goddess.
Well, once I had this awakening, I guess you would call it. Like Shakti had hit me. I then never could go back again, but of course I didn't know what to do with it, so I came back to the United States and then decided to study about Indian art really, because art was my thing, and eventually got a PhD in Indian art. Actually, you can't do just Indian art, so that's when I moved from being an art historian to being a cultural historian, because I have a degree in the history of art, history of religion, and cultural anthropology. I was trying, that's the first, so I have my academic credentials, and then I teach some of this, and then I write the book. What I did, it's a library book. I went to the library. A lot of it was done here at Widener or at Towser, which is the anthropological library, or it was done at the University of California, Berkeley Library. And it took me 3 years to do it. Then it's so fascinating to me that when I look at it now, and sometimes when I give talks, I read sections from it, I wouldn't change a word. So I say, well, maybe I channeled it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you know, great works like that are sometimes greater than who we are. And, you know, I was also thinking, you know, not to jump into another subject, but you said when you came back from India, you had like a minor nervous breakdown or something, you weren't sure what to talk about. And to me, that's a sign of like someone who's touched by, you know, a greater thing that needs to channel it through them, but doesn't really have the, you know, doesn't quite know how to do it yet, or, you know, you're bound by the boundaries of our society in a sense. So.
Well, and I had 4 children. Well, I couldn't, you know, when we came back in the summertime, and I sort of couldn't get my act together, but then they all had to go to school, so there was no one else but me to see that they were clothed and fed and everything else, so I just pulled myself together. But what I did then was to start going to graduate school. Yeah. And that really saved me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is your book is, as you said, it's a symbol for our time. Yes. I mean, it's a timeless thing. We're looking at the history, and you said it, I'm going to let you say it in your own. Why is it a symbol for our time?
Because we have been suffering as a culture, as a civilization, from male domination for 5,000 years, and particularly, this has been particularly true in the West, and particularly true in the United States and in America. And it's sad because the feminism and the women's movement has been wonderful for women. It really has liberated them, it's empowered them, it's changed many things, including certainly the art in the United States. But on the other hand, for many men, it's been disempowering. And people worry now about boys. There are far more girls than boys who go to graduate school. Mm-hmm. More girls who are lawyers, more girls who are becoming women who are becoming doctors. And they're concerned that about men. And there's something now called male studies, which is trying to empower men. But it's not, it's wrong to view it as some competition. Far better to think of it as an enabling thing, that men and women enable each other to find their true selves, and therefore they can be partners in the world rather than competitors.
Yes, I think that's very important. I think that, so we're like, the pendulum is swinging, right? So the women are, you know, even though it's still like a very male-dominated culture, and we see this, like you said, in the Republican primaries, we see what their agenda is. It's not very female empowering at all. But we also, I'm seeing that too with my work, that there's more of a need now suddenly for boys to have positive male role models. It's like we're doing a lot of this work for girls, for women. We're still rising up, we're still stepping up, we're still finding our way. You know, the goddess is a way, finding a book like yours is the way, however women are doing it. But yes, I'm seeing that there is a need for the boys and for the men to find their power again too, so like you said, so that we can be balanced in the world together. It's just such an interesting time we're living in.
Well, in the goddess iconography in free history, when we have no text, we don't have any words, we only have the images, overpowering in the Neolithic period, which is from 10,000, say, to 3,000 BCE, is female images. Perhaps 90% of them, or more than 90% are female, and only about 10% or less are male. And the role that the male plays is of the goddess's son, or in some of the myths, it's her lover or mate, but then who dies every year for a new one to come along. And so that's not empowering for men at all, those kinds of stories. So we don't have the same kind of mythology. I have a half-finished manuscript now called The Myth of the Male in America and Violence. The thing about is, what is the myth? Because a male, to be a man in America, a lot of it is that you have to be violent. Look at the games that the boys play. Yeah. And we've only, I'm shocked. I mean, I went to the movies the other day and there were 6 trailers before the main feature, and one was more violent than the next. And so I said, well, next time I'm not going into the theater until they put the main feature on. I don't know what to do about that. I think that we're in grave danger of because of the really turn in the media to violence, and the preference for violence, and the games that boys play. Even if it's a game, it still has, it's when you have something that's visual, it sinks deeply into the psyche, which is all the more reason we need the goddess.
Right. And conversations, like you said, you don't know what to do about it, but I think I'm so happy that you brought this up in the context of what we're talking about.
One of my wishes some years ago, remember the Cabbage Patch doll?
Yeah.
All right, well, I wanted to have a Willendorf doll that had every little boy, 2 or 3 years old, dragging one around.
Oh, that's a beautiful image.
Maybe we can still do that. You know, with her breasts hanging down.
Right. Oh my God, that's wild, Elinor.
Because little boys are really very tender.
Yeah.
And it's only when they begin to be 5 to 7 or so that they feel they have to break away from mom.
Yeah.
And stamp down that tenderness in themselves.
Wow, that's really beautiful. I'm so glad you brought that up. So I want to switch gears a little bit, unless you have more to say about that, but I was thinking about asking about your new project that you're working on.
All right. Can I go, just a few more things about the goddess, and then I'll come to that.
Yes, okay.
One of the things that's important in our concern about ecology is how ecological she is. And this is true in the Neolithic. So therefore, I show in the book how there, among other cultures, one particular one that we know about, which was in England, in the area where Stonehenge is, and Avebury, those places, that we from the archaeological remains, we see that there was a cycle of the goddess of that period. This is about 5,000 years ago. And so that in spring comes early to England. So in February, earlier than here in New England. So in February, spring would be coming. So that would be the time of the sexual introduction of the girls in the village. So they would have a whole, and all the girls who would come into puberty that year would have their sexual introduction. And then in May, which is 3 months, the quarter cycle, which is the goddess cycle, 3 months later, they would all be pregnant. And so then they have, all right, and then 3 months after that, they would all give birth in August. So that when they give birth, that's the harvest season. So then that's when, so they have, they made formations in the landscape. For instance, for the birth time, they created an artificial hill 300 feet high, and that with a flat top, and so that all the people from the village would come, bring the first fruits of the harvest, and celebrate and dance. It would be a country fair kind of occasion, and to celebrate the birth of the goddess. And then 3 months later, which is what we now call Halloween or All Hallows Eve, the winter would come, and they would have made corn dollies out of corn straw and bury them to give birth again next February. So this cycle of the seasons, and this is very important to understand, because the goddess tradition then and the goddess rituals and the goddess festivals were all situated within the round of seasons of the year. And we, of course, notice that it's different. Certainly Christmas is different than the 4th of July, but we don't realize that the reason we're celebrating Christmas at this particular time of the year is because this is the winter solstice. And therefore that when they didn't know when Jesus was born, and so in order to coincide with the peasant festivals at the time, they made Jesus' birthday when there already was a festival.
Right. What other holidays do
This is true of all the holidays associated with the Virgin Mary. All of them were goddess festivals.
I know some of our Jewish holidays also.
Oh, the Jewish holidays are all the same. It's the same thing, and they're all because they were an agricultural people.
Yeah.
When I was at the Isle of Patmos, it's a Greek island, at Easter time, all right, 1 year. All right, so the men do circle dances there. So, and you climb up on a donkey to the top of the hill, and then the men were saying that if Christ doesn't rise, there'll be no crop that year. Now think about that. I mean, that's it directly goes back to agricultural fertility, which all of those things do, because that's survival, that's regeneration.
Right.
And we've lost that.
Yes, we have, and we lost that.
And once we've lost it, it's very critical for people to think about this. Once you have a God, like our God the Father, who is separate from his creation, then you no longer have that sense of embodiment. So then that was part of the Jewish tradition, and then the Christian tradition does something else on top of that, which is to say that life on this earth is really not what it's about. It's salvation for some future time. So then you've negated totally the life force.
Right. And the body.
And the body, yes.
Yeah.
And the whole mystery and celebration of sexuality. Now, before we were going some other place. What were you saying?
I was asking about your book, but now I'm thinking about, like, the goddess represents the body, represents the earth, fertility, all of this stuff. And, I read in a Tom Robbins book, I can't remember the exact line, but I loved it so much, but it was like, these are the places that represent the feminine, and yet the masculine is about, like, cutting down trees and clearing land, and, this is just the culture. This is the culture that we live in that negates the body.
Well, we have certainly been trying now for 30 years to get over the fact that we rule the earth, and it's our job task is to dominate it, but because now we realize that with our domination we'll have no nature left, and we really have to do something to encourage regeneration.
Yeah.
What my latest encounter with the goddess has been the village goddess in Orissa, which is in eastern India. And I decided to do this about 10 years ago because I wanted to have the experience of a living tradition. And Orissa is a backward provincial state with 51,000 villages, and each village has their own goddess. Wow. And she has her own name, her own origin story. She's a tree or a rock. Now think about that again. Because, just think about the tree. I mean, the tree is a marvelous symbol for the regeneration of life. A seed in the ground, or the earth, grows up, has a thin trunk, and then sends out branches. The branches have leaves. The leaves flower, and then they have seeds, and they drop into the earth, and the cycle starts all over again. So it's a wonderful symbol for regeneration. And there are many tree goddesses in Western civilization. In Orissa, the tree or the rock is daubed or painted with red cinder, red pigment of the earth, and which is the color of the goddess, or maybe a red scarf is tied around her. That's the first manifestation, first recognition of the sacredness of the tree or the rock. Then they will later on perhaps add silver eyes and make something that looks like a face.
Wow.
And then in time that will become more of a figure. But it doesn't become a fully anthropomorphic figure until you get the male priest and Hinduism there. And by that time, women have lost the power of direct connection. Because with the village goddess, one of the things that's so empowering for women is that there's no mediator, there's no priest. They communicate directly with her. And they communicate through something they call dreams. Now, it's not a dream like we think of dreams in the middle of the night. I think it's sort of, they tap into their subconscious. But in any case, just imagine this. You have a problem. Your baby isn't doing well. And you are very troubled because there isn't good medical care. And you're concerned the baby will die, as many children do die in infancy and early childhood. And but you tell all your troubles to the village goddess. And she tells you what to do. Or tells you that she can't help you, but she can listen, and even just her listening makes you feel better. Or you have a problem with what crop to grow, and you consult her. Or there's a problem with your husband, but whatever it is, she's there for you, always. And as the villagers say over and over again, she's always willing to listen. She can't always help, but she's always willing to listen. Now, recently I came upon a theory that amplifies this power that this village goddess has as a tree or a rock. The physicist Niels Bohr, famous physicist of the early 20th century, has a theory called a Gentile Realism. And according to Niels Bohr, trees and rocks have energy. They can send out this energy and people can feel it. And of course that's exactly the way the villagers feel. That the tree or the rock has energy and they feel it. And so that was very exciting for me to be able to put into my book. The village goddess in Orissa is served, there are two major rituals for her. One is Kalahari, which is healing, which is a healer who's possessed by the goddess, who does hands-on healing. The other is Bali, and Bali is blood sacrifice. So blood sacrifice probably once was human, but and then it became buffalo. Buffaloes are very expensive, so they're mostly doing goats and chickens today. But these traditions, both the healing and the blood sacrifice, are part of the tribal traditions in Orissa. And this is one of the things that makes my study so interesting, because Orissa, more than any other place in India, still has 25% tribal population. So the tribals are really people of the forest, people of the earth, and they're not Hindus, and they have an earth mother, and as well as a village goddess, and but the icons that they have, the things that they are trees and rocks, and particularly rocks.
Wow, that is cool.
Yeah.
So have you been there?
Oh yes.
Wow.
Oh, that's my favorite part of my field research.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to do a whole book just on that because I have so much material that I have never, that I don't have room for in the book.
Wow.
And the healers among the tribal people are mostly women, almost all women. And they are very strong and powerful women. And they do the rituals, which include dancing, and for instance, in one particular tribe that I spent some time with, in western India, western Orissa, in the hills, in a place called Caucus, they worship the tiger goddess. Her name is Dangar Day. And Dangar Day is the hill, Dangar Day is the tiger, Dangar Day is a bamboo pole that represents her. And so and Dangar Day lives up there in a cave at the top of the highest hill. And so then they still have tigers in this part of India. When they do this big sacrifice of the buffalo every 3 years, because buffaloes are very expensive, they then, after they have killed the buffalo, first the priestess is a woman, and she doesn't do the actual beheading. There's a man who does that, and they leave the body of the tiger there. They take the head back down to the village, but they leave the body there. And if the tigers come and eat the body, then they know that they'll be safe for the next year.
Wow.
Because of the next 3 years till they do it again, because then the tigers have accepted their sacrifice.
Wow. Fascinating. That's still going on too.
Yes.
That's amazing. And thank goodness, thank goddess that these ancient rituals are still happening on our planet, that it hasn't been like ironed out of everybody yet, because I think that those kinds of people that kind of hold, a certain integrity that we really still need here.
And they connect us with nature.
Yeah.
Now think of the fact that these cat animals, the earliest Neolithic culture that we know about is at Chapel Hill in Turkey, and there the goddess sits on a throne. So that's another one. That's what they had leopards there. All right, and then there's Durga, who's the pan-Indian goddess, and sometimes she rides a tiger and sometimes she rides a lion.
Right.
But in the original representations of her, she has a tiger.
I love the Indian goddesses. Love them. Like Lakshmi is one of my favorites. Once I discovered her, and I was like, if I ever have a daughter, I want to name her Lakshmi. Or if I have like a female cat or dog, I mean, that's the name. Do you have a favorite goddess that you?
Well, Lakshmi really is mine also, because she represents abundance.
Yeah.
And I say about abundance, you can't have there's no limit to abundance. And but we need to have some fierce goddesses as well. And this is one of the things that lots of Western or American women have trouble with. They don't like the idea of Kali, chopping off all those heads or anything else like that. They don't like the idea of violence in women. But this nature is violent, and the goddess is a force of nature. So that she can be malevolent as well as benevolent. So, and for instance, when smallpox was epidemic, it no longer is, it's been wiped out, but when smallpox was epidemic, they would say that when the smallpox comes to your home, the goddess has brought it. She brings the disease, she is the disease, and she cures the disease. And this is very hard for us to get our mind around, because we like to separate out everything and identify things as separate and discrete. But that isn't true in Indian culture.
Yeah. So say more about that, because I think this is very important. I mean, it also represents a woman in all of her aspects, like the whole spectrum of her emotions, from kind and gentle and loving, nurturing, to like killer instincts
and violent. And also the male-female. There is the god Shiva. One of his manifestations is half woman, half man. And so the fact that you can have this half woman, half man, and there is Shiva isn't discredited. He's not called homosexual or anything else like that. He's just half woman. In some of his manifestations, is half woman and half man. So this slipperiness, or this kind of ambivalence, people are comfortable with ambivalence there. We aren't comfortable with ambivalence at all. One interesting thing in the Neolithic period is that in a place called Iron Gate, it used to separate what was Yugoslavia from Romania. I mean, it still does, but we don't have Yugoslavia as such anymore. In that place, they found, the archaeologists found the marks of a civilization probably about 8,000 BC. And there they had all these, on the shore of the river, they had all these structures that were shaped like a vulva, V-shaped. And then in the river they had huge, huge carp, some of which weighed 300 pounds.
Wow.
And then the head of all of these ritual structures that they made, they would have a stone. The stone might be like a megalith. It might be 6 feet high, or it might just be 3 feet high, but it was carved in such a way it had a face and some ribs or gills like a fish has, and then also a vulva. And and then they found buried in the hearth of the ritual structure the bones of the carpfish.
Wow.
And then another aspect of this place was that there were wild fruit trees growing in the hills, so people then had plenty of food in this area. When these were first discovered by an archaeologist and taken to the British Museum, one large one, and there was a big show, and they called him King of the Danube, even though he had, or she had a vulva and breasts. But this has been corrected now. We realize that it's the fish goddess.
Wow.
But the point I want to make about this is that people then think about this in terms of where your nurture comes from, where your food comes from, where what you deify. Not some abstract deity, but something that is vital to your ongoing life.
So, I don't know if you have your little notebook about what you wrote this morning. Did you want to share what you wrote? That you wrote something this morning while you were writing the tea. Yeah. Like, share that with us.
Oh my goddess, there she was right in front of my eyes. Did I never notice? Sizzling red hot, fully fleshed out, power mom, the mentor I'd always been waiting for, ready to lead me in this crazy world, lead me on this wild dance called life. No need to buy into men's reality, no need to follow dad's advice, no need to have another baby. The golden door of liberation is just ahead, but you need to know the code and recognize that it's invoked in blood by generations of girls like you who found the way out of the maze.
Love it. That's just an average ride on the goddess train, I guess. So do you have any words of wisdom for girls or women who are just starting to discover the goddess in their own lives?
Well, this would be true for all young women, that the most important thing is to be fully in your body. And this is very hard to do in our culture because of the ongoing tape in the media of what way women should use their bodies to manipulate, use their bodies, in ways that are destructive for both them and others. Ways in which they don't allow them to access their intuition. It's very important. We really know inside of ourselves what's good for us, but the messages are all wrong. And so that, and then this is really today clouded by all the drugs and other things that people use that disturb their natural way of being. That's one thing. The other thing is that I think we've become kind of lopsided, that in the opportunities that have come, not for everyone, but for many women, to access power, they have just bought into the male way. So that instead of feminizing, if I may use that word, the workplace, the competition and is just as rigid. And women pay a lot of penalty for this. First of all, you can't rise in a corporate world in the same way a man can if you give priority to your family. So one of the things that we need to do is to really let everyone give priority to their family. There has been a big shift coming in men taking responsibility for family life. Certainly when my children were born and my husband was on his way to success in management, that was all my goal, was just to make sure he never was bothered by the children. That he had every opportunity to go forth on his own mission. Today, I think that this is particularly true when I talk to the families in the suburbs where my daughters live, or one daughter lives. I mean, they really are family-centered, children-centered families. Well, I think men need the goddess as well as the women, and for this, if anything, just to temper what is the violence that men are supposed to embrace as part of what it is to be a man. And not that there isn't violence in the goddess, there is. but still there are the other sides of this. And a man needs certainly among other things, needs to be able to express his feelings. Yeah. And that it's very, for men to be brought up to feel that they can't cry or that they can't be tender is very sad.
Yeah. It keeps us all in an imbalance.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, at the beginning, we picked goddess cards, and you chose Artemis, and I chose Demeter.
Oh.
And you had said to me, "Oh, Demeter would have been a better choice for me." Why? I was
well,
just
because certainly enormous impact on my life is having 4 children. Demeter is the mythological goddess. We don't have an equivalent of this in India. Whose relationship with her daughter is primary and central. And there are many different ways of looking at this. You can see Demeter and Persephone as two places in the life cycle, or the mother-daughter thing. And there isn't any other myth that I know of, in either Western or certainly in Indian, that honors the mother and daughter in the same kind of way. The myth of Demeter and Demeter's place in Ephesus. No, that's not Ephesus. Ephesus is where the Virgin Mary was. It's a place about 14 miles from Athens where the cult of Demeter was. And that was one of the mysteries. At the time, around the time of Jesus, there were 4 mystery cults in the Roman world, and one of them was the cult of Demeter. And that was a very important one. Even Julius Caesar is said to have been initiated into it. And we don't really know what went on. It was all underground, and people were probably entranced. But from what the sacred words that were said in the end was that the goddess had given birth to a boy, a son. All right, so that fits in with Jesus and fits in with male dominance and everything else. But that's the story of Demeter. But the other piece of her story, which is very important, is that when her daughter Persephone was kidnapped by the god Hades and taken to the underworld, and Demeter said if she didn't get her daughter back, that nothing would grow. So she went on a strike, and nothing grew until she got her daughter back. But she couldn't get it. But unfortunately, her daughter ate something in the underworld, and therefore couldn't, for 4 months of the year, had to stay down there with Hades.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have our spring and our summer,
yes,
and our fall and our winter where nothing grows.
But the sense of Demeter also in a time when she was grieving and didn't know where her daughter was, took the role of a nursemaid to a king and his the baby, a little boy, whom she wanted to make immortal, but she could have done by putting him into the fire and the hearth. But the mother came and pulled the baby out, so the baby wasn't immortal. I call the Greek goddesses mostly soap opera goddesses because they had such lurid lifestyles and adventures, whereas I think that the Indian ones are more embedded in nature.
I love that. That's wonderful. Thank you so